Welcome to Constellations Conversations with me, Rowland Smith, and Nicola Dunn. Good to see you, Nicola.
Hi, Robert. Good to see you.
So for this conversation, we thought we'd, I suppose, go a little bit more personal by talking about what led us into constellations in the first place, and obviously on towards training and practicing fairly intensively, I think, for both of us. So I'm not sure this is something we know about each other particularly. So it'll be interesting to hear your story. Do you want to give a
Okay.
sense? Yeah.
I think that's true because we sort of met through constellations, but we didn't meet before.
Mm.
I think we're a bit like that joke, a philosopher, a psychotherapist, and a constellator walk into a pub, I think. So I'm a psychotherapist, you're the philosopher plus. So for me, it was the path of psychotherapy, and which led me into interest in group therapy and family therapy and a systemic way of looking. So in a way, constellations, either family constellations or organizational constellations, was a natural step, but a slightly more avant-garde step because constellations were a little bit outside more traditional family therapy. So I think the way I made the step was through a very good friend who was training with Bert Hellinger in New York, and she was commuting from London to his training. It was one of the last trainings he did in New York. And she said to me, the way good friends do, she said to me, she put a hand on my arm and just said, you should really look into this. And in the way that you represent in constellations, I sort of felt impacted by that. It was a casual statement, but it felt full and deep and impacted me in a way that I didn't choose to ignore.
Mm.
So on that basis, I looked at what was available in the UK, and I went to my first, I was quite intrepid. Went to my first workshop, and I stepped in as the first constellation. So I'd never seen a constellation, all the things we advise against. So I stepped in and did a constellation first, and then found out what it was afterwards.
You did a constellation as a representative, not an issue holder.
No, as an issue holder.
Oh my goodness! Wow, you really did take the plunge, didn't you?
And so, but it gave me lots to sort of work with afterwards. And I was the way you are when you've done a constellation. I was slightly rearranged, and but I was incredibly impacted by the method. I thought, okay, this is something for me.
Wow. Well, okay, I'll come back and ask you a few questions, but I'll catch up with you.
Please catch up with me because I would love to hear.
Yes, so you said I was a philosopher, and my background is as an academic. So in the 1990s, well, in the 1980s, I went up to Oxford. I read English as an undergraduate, but got immediately really into what's called literary theory, which is literature meets philosophy, broadly speaking. I finished my undergraduate degree and then decided to stay on and do my DPhil, as they call it in Oxford, on a French philosopher called Jacques Derrida. And Derrida's work, although philosophy, is very interdisciplinary. And one of his constant references is to Sigmund Freud. So through Derrida, I began to look at theories of Freud as a kind of theory of the mind, I suppose. I'd never done any sort of clinical practice or been in psychotherapy. But by the late 1990s, starting what was now my second book, the first one was on Derrida, the second one was on Freud, I also had some psychotherapy of my own for the first time and found it extraordinary. If you've never done therapy before, I think it's quite something. And I remember leaving the sessions absolutely exhausted, as though a muscle I'd never really worked in my life. I was in my about 30 by then. Yeah, about 30 by then. had been worked for the first time. So I'd come away from those sessions feeling wrecked, actually. I then, to cut a long story short, while working on this new book on Freud, I worked on it over a long time, and it was on very theoretical stuff, the death drive, actually, in Freud, and comparing the death drive with Heidegger's theory of death and Durkheim and Pascal. I'm really heavy. I've got it on the shelf here. It's completely unreadable. But anyway, I moved from this very academic world, because I wanted a new challenge, basically, into the world of management consultancy, and particularly organizational consultancy. So less on the kind of, mergers and acquisitions or finance and strategy side, and more in terms of organizational behavior and all that kind of malarkey. And in the year 2000, a good friend of mine, who you know a little bit too, took himself off for the day. And I was in the office when he came back. It was about, 6 o'clock in the evening. And he basically said, "Oh my God, I've just been to the most extraordinary day." I said, "Oh yeah, really?" He said, "Yes, it was about the orders of love." And it's interesting what you said about things affecting you. This was my moment, I suppose, of what Freud would call cathexis, which, in fact, he never used that word. Besetzung was his word, where, I suppose it's a bit like Cupid's arrow pricking you, where you suddenly think, oh, there's something in that phrase, which is like a, mystery wrapped in an enigma in a secret, or whatever Churchill said about the Soviet Union. And there was something about his enthusiasm, because he is a very rational, a very open-minded, but very rational person, the way he said it, and this phrase, which already just started reverberating through my kind of inner caves. And so, like you, I went along to a workshop in London. And at the beginning, the constellator walked in and thought, "Oh God, I've been missold. This isn't going to be not." They're all bloody hippies. They're all, the opening round, I'm sitting with a lot of anxiety. Oh God, this is going to be all, hand wringing in a circle, singing Kumbaya, when can I get out, basically. But then, of course, the first constellation began, and I didn't bring an issue, but I was brought in as a representative. I think I was an uncle in the very first one. And I did think, what is going on here? Why can't I just carry on being, clever, haughty, sarcastic Robert, looking down on everybody and judging everybody around me? I'm actually being sucked into this thing. And yeah, when the constellator asked me, "How are you feeling as the uncle about the nephew?" I was feeling things. Anyway, I sat through the process for the whole day, and I walked out almost as if I'd been clonked on the head. I had to walk around London just sort of processing, basically. So that was my first experience. So I've come parallel with you, I think, now, by giving that.
Can I just want to note one thing. I just think how courageous it was to, first of all, for your colleague to mention in a corporate environment, I've been to something based on the orders of love. And secondly, that because it's not a sort of common phrase in English. I think in German it probably flows a little more easily. But it wasn't about the words. It was about really the resonance they created. So you're describing something as if it's a very ordinary step in the corporate world, but of course it's not. But both of you had taken it.
That's right.
And it's interesting that we both were encouraged by someone whom we trusted.
Yes, that's I like that observation. That matters, doesn't it? That your path towards something matters a lot. Yeah, and he is still a great friend. And seeing the enthusiasm in him, I suppose, was wonderful. I was reminded the other day, by the way, of the origin of the word enthusiasm, which seems kind of germane here. It's a 17th century word. The N means in. The theus bit comes from the Greek theos, as in God. So the enthusiasts of the 17th century were like Quakers, people who had sort of God stirring within them, something bigger than you are. I'm not making a point for a belief in God, really, but the idea of being a little bit possessed by this inner frenzy that I saw in him, and I kind of caught, I suppose, thereafter. But then I was very tentative. I mean, for the first few years after that, I would just go along to workshops, and throw myself into it. I loved it. I can't remember the first issue of my own I did. But I do remember the feeling of seeing people in my life represented with this, not just precision, but kind of economy. Yeah, yes, that is my dad I'm seeing there. Not just that's a bit like his behavior. It's not like looking at an impressionist. It's not like there's a famous British impressionist called Mike Yarwood who died recently. It wasn't like seeing Mike Yarwood do an impression of my dad. It was as if his essence, let's call it that, for want of a better word, was suddenly manifested or brought to life. And it is interesting that, isn't it? I think more broadly in constellations, I've never thought of this point before, Nicola, but you're not seeing impressions or impersonations of individuals, are you? Because people, they keep their same accent, their facial expression is still kind of broadly theirs. And yet the quality of the words, the intent behind the words seems to absolutely capture the kind of quiddity of the person being represented.
Yes, and I think there's there's just a kind of relaxed certainty about their experiences and representations. And I think in those early days when I was going to workshops, I think even in that first workshop, I made a friend. It's like going to school and made a friend. And she did a constellation, and it involved her father who passed. And in the representation, the person representing her father, as she said the exact last words that her father had spoken to her.
Gosh.
Spontaneously, without knowing her, without knowing her father. So those little confirmations along the way, I think they're like sort of sturdy flagstones that you feel you can kind of stand on when you're just coming into constellation work. She had a scientific background, so she wasn't, I'm a secret hippie who just happens to like, flowers and things like that. But she wasn't from that background, so it was a bit like your friend. So it was even more of a leap for her. So I think it's an interesting way that when you start your journey, you come to a constellation workshop, and I presume there's some people who never come back. But mostly, most people find something because they've spent good efforts to get to the workshop. Yeah. And they normally find something that they're looking for.
Yeah. I find it interesting that in a way for both of us, constellations was then something we had to find a way of blending or integrating with an existing practice. I'd like to hear from you how you've blended that with psychotherapy, because, through a certain lens, they are in conflict, or one can exaggerate the differences, at least, between psychotherapy and constellations and produce quite a lot of differences and contrasts, even contradictions between them. And for me, on my side, because I was working as a consultant with organizations, I was having to find a way of squaring this very empirical, rational world of organizational constellations and management consultancy with this very peculiar practice, and presenting it in a vaguely plausible way.
Yes. So I think from my side, so psychotherapy colleagues would maybe understand something about representation in the constellations. In a live constellation, they're sort of interested in transference and countertransference, so they could sort of be open to that. I think the where the paths might start to part would be around the impact, the of the transgenerational cascade, as I would call it. And that was in those days. I think in these days, maybe not so much. And obviously within psychotherapy, there are many streams that make a full and fat river, and many overlaps and maybe separations among those different streams. So I happen to be positioned on a stream that kind of lent a little bit more towards the constellation side, but I'm always able to have a conversation with psychotherapists. And even in one of my workshops, I remember I'll often start with a round, as you do, Robert, and the person introduced themselves and said, well, Frank, I'm a psychotherapist. I have my own psychotherapy training school. And frankly, I was sent here by my wife, and I've only come in order to gather information in order to basically be able to annul this process with her. And I said, that's fine. I much prefer someone being honest.
Yeah.
Not. And he had a different approach at the end, which was nice. And he came back and he did his own constellations. But, he was a good representation of someone who'd heard about it and thought, I'm a psychotherapist with these particular beliefs and this isn't for me. And yet he came. This is the surprising thing.
Mm.
He still came. He came without his wife. So I always remember that. And I think there is a sort of, sometimes that's the way the constellations work upon you. Even despite your good judgment, you find yourself coming to a workshop.
Yeah. I loved your phrase there, by the way. Did you say intergenerational cascade? Is that the phrase you used?
Intergenerational cascade, yeah.
Love that. That's a really fantastic phrase. Yes, so you found a way of, I don't really like the word integrating, but at least blending a little bit these two aspects of your practice.
Yes, and so it means a word I don't like either, hybrid, I suppose, in some way. I think I'm fluid, I'm consistent within myself, but I might be a little bit hard to categorize.
Yeah. Yeah, and from my side, the challenge has been working with constellations in an organizational setting. Now, I do as much what I call them personal constellations rather than family constellations. That's the phrase I tend to use. As organizational constellations, I do about half and half, I'd say, probably these days. But it's interesting. On Thursday of last week, I was giving a lecture in Cambridge to some Dutch people on a late summer program. There were 30 of them in the room, sort of grown-ups, basically. And I said in passing, I practice Familieopstellung, as they call it in Dutch. We have family constellation. Anybody heard of that? All 30 hands went up.
Right. Yeah.
It's very well known now in Holland and I think Germany. In this country now, when I run an organizational constellation for big corporate clients, I'll ask if anybody's heard of it, and maybe 20% will put their hands up. But when I started, it was zero, absolutely zero. So it is creeping from the margins to the mainstream here. And what that means is that there's still quite a lot of heavy lifting to do doing a constellation in an organizational setting that doesn't necessarily apply in a personal constellation setting, where people are generally coming on their own, paying for themselves of their own volition. In a corporate setting, some of the people, might have led it, but quite a lot of people would just have been brought along as part of a corporate event of some kind, a strategy workshop or something like that. And so I've had to work quite hard at positioning constellations for an audience like that. And in fact, I never use the word constellations. I come up, the one I've most frequently used is systemic mapping, because it sounds least threatening and most scientific, I suppose. So there's that. I then physically try and make the space look more like a workshop. So I'll have flip charts basically and post-it notes around, because that's again a familiar setup for organizational people. And then at the beginning, I spend quite a lot of time talking about the theory of the systemic. And the point of that is number one, the cleverer it sounds, the more credibility it seems it has, basically. Number two, I can establish my credibility a bit because I'm capable of talking about it in those terms. And number three, it gives people a cognitive handle on the process, because they know people aren't used to doing anything. Can't tell you the number of times corporate clients joke around, oh, we're sitting in a circle, are we? Or, are we going to be hugging a tree? So I always spend a lot of time up front doing that, then the constellation, and then lots of time at the end, applications. How does this relate to the business plan, other initiatives you've got going, and so on. Sorry, that was a longer commentary than I'm planned to give, but I was just thinking about ways in which we've both had to try and adjust to our other practice.
But I think what you're also sharing with our listeners is that you too make bridges for people.
Yeah.
We have a bridge made for us, and within our other environments in which we work or teach, and I teach on a coaching course as well, that part of the skill you develop over time, hopefully, is that you can make a bridge for someone from their circumstances into the process, in order that it somehow has a link with either their systemic experience in an organization or their personal experience, in relationships and family. And I think it's interesting, that distinction, maybe for another time, between describing a personal constellation and a family constellation. So we have another sort of subject there. So I maybe have a slight advantage in that when people, I really appreciate the work you do with people who've come for a corporate event, and you are, having to, as I said, create that bridge across, so that they are allow themselves to be impacted by the constellation work. And so mostly, if I'm running an open workshop about personal issues, that people are already motivated because they come because they have an issue, they have a curiosity. And so I think that makes my work a little bit easier. And it's a mix of people who have got a lot of experience, some have got a little experience, and some have none. But it always seems to kind of blend and work. And, I like the image of a flock of kind of geese that you somehow, you can do more of the flapping if you're stronger, got stronger wings, or you can go to the back and go with the stream.
Yes, I like that, the flapping. I was thinking we should probably begin to bring this to a close. We've been chatting for a while now, but maybe one way of finishing is just by thinking about, because this conversation has been about what's led us to constellations, kind of where we are now, our feelings about constellations today. And I'd love to hear what your feelings are about it. But for my part, I'd say, I'm as in love with constellations now as I was at the beginning. It's probably deeper because I've had so much more experience of it now, but it really is the kind of professional love of my life, and I continually find new things in it.
That's beautifully spoken and actually touching, Robert, to actually hear you say that. I would say the same. I sometimes describe myself as a constellations nerd, just because it's a nice frame for my obsession. I feel a healthy and ever-flowing obsession with constellations and the method, and where it takes me personally, and where it allows me to accompany others. I find that incredibly resourcing. So, I think will always be a part of my life. And like you, I found my flow with it. And I had other streams, but actually this is the one that has remained consistent. And I think in a way, probably that's why both of us like teaching and sharing and training other people, because you get to share something, we get to share something that's been so important to us.
Yeah, beautifully put. Thank you. Well, Nicola, we'll draw that to a close for now. Thank you to everybody for listening. And if you'd like to follow up with us, Nicola has a website, which will come up on the slide, nicoladunconstellations.com. Mine is robertrowlandsmith.com. Do please like us if you're following us on YouTube, subscribe, share, do all those social media things, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.